Hosts on this magnificent Monday morning, the Admiral, Bill Stubblefield, 2-star.
Good morning, Rob. It's spring is a-coming.
Yeah, we have 10 days till spring.
Yeah.
3 70-degree days this week are in the forecast. Not today, but we'll be close. So it's time to put the winter coat away for a little while.
Yeah, it feels like spring out there.
Until the home show. Once the home show hits, it'll be 10 degrees again, but until then. That chuckle you hear from New York Times best-selling author John Gilstrap.
Good morning. Happy Monday.
Yeah, how are we doing on the book?
Actually pretty good. Just killed a family of 4 yesterday.
Jeez. How marvelous it must be to hang out with you. Just going home.
That's a measure of success. How many does it kill in a given day?
Yeah, Julie just must love walking around the hallways of the Gilstrap mansion with you, always wondering what's coming next.
Do not startle me.
Yeah. Well, that's a way to kick off the week right there. Yeah. Who do we go to next, Bill, after that?
Yeah, I'm staying away from him, Rob. I want to keep a big distance between me and Mr. Gilstrap.
Probably not a bad plan. Our guest on the program to start our show today is Steve Pearson from the West Virginia Independent Observer. Steve, good morning to you.
Good morning. Yeah, so I think it's spring. You seem to be like the kind of guy that likes to stand in line to wait for spring, and I'm just going to just grab it because it's here.
I don't like to jump the shark, man.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we had was it 3 years ago, the St. Patrick's Day Festival, the parade. It was 70-something degrees, and then a week later for the home show it was like 12, literally.
Yeah.
Right. Remember that cold front blew in?
I remember that cold.
It was the first year we were all at the Roundhouse.
Yep.
Which is outdoors, basically.
And I remember you complaining about it, saying this is cold out here.
Oh. Yeah. And then on Sunday, which I didn't have to work the Sunday, it was even colder.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not going to buy the fake spring tease that March gives you. I'll enjoy it, Steve.
Okay.
But there's been a few Marches in your life in the past when an 18-inch snowfall has followed these warmer weather.
And let's be honest, Rob, you can be stoic about a lot of things. Cold is not one of them.
I'm not a cold person.
No.
I've done cold as a kid in Pittsburgh, growing up in the winter. I had enough of it.
And at the home show, you sort of look like Bernie Sanders at the inauguration with the mittens. And
No, more like Randy in Christmas Story. I can't put my arms down. You'll put them down when you get to school. Yeah. Steve, let's talk Sidewinder and water in Jefferson County and the latest from what you've covered. And I think there's a meeting coming up.
Well, there is. So that's tomorrow night. March 11th, 7 o'clock, Washington High School, is the Planning Commission, County Planning Commission meeting to review the concept plan for the proposed bottling plant. It was had been scheduled for February, but we had some snow, a lot of snow, and so it got pushed back to March because the weather's going to be good. They're expecting quite a crowd, which is why they moved it to the high school. Mm-hmm. There was about 150 people showed up at a meeting in December where this project was originally proposed, but then got rejected because it wasn't complete. So just to recap for anybody in the audience who hasn't heard about this, it's an industrial site, about 260 acres, about a half mile west of Middleway, which is on Leetown Pike, just kind of west and south of Charlestown. And the proposal is for a bottling factory, water bottling factory, two buildings, a 300,000 square foot building and then a 700,000 square foot building. And now the plan includes a pipeline about a little over a mile to the other side of Middleway to take water, adjacent from Lake Louise, and a water treatment plant to treat all this, because it turns out, even though they thought they were getting groundwater, because it's right there at Lake Louise, there's actually bacteria in it, probably there's been a lot of cows in Jefferson County. So it has to be treated as what they call groundwater under the influence of surface water. So just like if they were taking water directly out of the stream. So it has implications for how they have to treat it. A little bit more complicated than just sort of like deionizing it. It's pretty much the same stuff that Charlestown Utilities does for the drinking water. So it's a fairly big, facility, and the process now is a concept plan. So it's basically going to the Planning Commission to say, does this meet the criteria of the zoning ordinance? Can you do what you're proposing to do on the parcel, given its zoning? And one of the key issues here is that they have multiple parcels. One of them is industrial, but the others are rural. And that seems to be where the conflict is coming in, is that in an industrial zone, you can do a lot of things. In the rural zone, agriculture is the primary intent of rural, and then it has other uses that are allowed either by right or conditional. Water extraction, because we have zoning over there in Jefferson County, is not listed as one of those permitted uses in the rural zone, and that seems to be the one of the sticking points. So
how about the industrial zone? Is it listed in the industrial zone?
You can do extraction, like you could do a quarry in an industrial zone. This particular industrial zone has a history, though. It was farmland until World War II. After World War II, Berkeley Woolen Mills, Virginia Woolen Mills, all the same company, bought it because they needed a place to wash all the clothes. So if you heard stories about how the Opequon used to turn green or pink, it's because they were washing the wool, the garments, and this is back in the 50s. 3M bought it in the 60s to do lithographic plates, which is basically, if you think about like film, right? You have Fuji made film, Kodak made film. Well, 3M made film, but this is a film, and it's not the correct term, but it's a lithographic plate that has a chemical emulsion on top of it that when you expose it, that's how you make a printing plate. So this was the bulk printing plate. So they would ship these out, around the country. It was a big business for several decades until digital. So until the 80s and then the early part of the 90s, it was a big business, and then it really tailed off. And that's when they started, it went through several hands. And the reason why I bring that up is because one of the issues that's been under contention is the traffic. Middleway is a very old place, kind of a crossroads, and if you squint, you can kind of still see what it looked like in the Civil War, and you can imagine the horses and carriages, and the roads are not really very big. And that's, the residents are very concerned about the traffic.
Steve, but since it used to be a plant that had a lot of trucks coming in and out, how is that any different than this?
Well, that's what I was going back to the history. So I've spoken with a good half dozen, former employees at the plant. I went back all the way into the 70s. Digging up people, not like John digs up people in his books.
No, John puts them in the ground.
Right,
I rarely dig them up.
But and they said, it's a different kind of process. So by the 90s, it was like 20 trucks a day, small amount, because they would be, they had distribution. 3M had distribution around the country, so they were packing these trucks and they were putting them off to major distribution centers. They weren't doing distribution out of the factory, so they were at least 3M was very efficient. They had about 300 employees in the mid 90s, and this is when I was talking with them. Just after that is when the business kind of hit a cliff, and that's when 3M divested. They spun it off into their division that did the floppy disks. They bundled up all their sort of businesses that they thought were going to be obsolete. VHS tapes, floppy disks. Printing was going to digital, and then they sold it to another company, and then Kodak bought that. So by the time, over the course of 2 years, it went from like 150 workers down to about 28 workers by around 1999. So if there was traffic there, we're talking it's been over 30 years since there was any meaningful traffic. And again, back in the 70s, and 80s when it would have been more traffic, perhaps these were smaller trucks. And the nature of the trucks that they were bringing in, it was not a constant flow is very much the sense I get. And now this proposal is talking about 160 trucks a day. So whether it's 20 trucks, or 40 trucks back, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, or 160 trucks, it's a pretty significant
with a generation gap.
With a big generation gap, right? So the town has cycled on. I mean, you think about it. If the people who were working there in the 60s and 70s, they would be in their 90s, and certainly people who are living in Middleway. But this is the village is turned over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this is not what they are used to.
Not what they signed. Not what people signed up for, and that's a lot of what zoning is all about. Is when you buy a property, you're buying it in the context of what that zoning district is. If you want to do farming, you're assuming you can do farming. And if all of a sudden a subdivision pops up next to you and you've got to put up fences to keep people from coming over and petting your cute cows, that's where you start to get problems. The other thing, I was just going to say, it has implications for that intersection there. So originally it was going to be a light, the Department of Highways. And because of this traffic increase, now they switched it over to a roundabout because the Department of Highways is saying, well, a light's not going to do this.
So they're planning like this is coming no matter what the protests are.
Well, the Department of Highways already had to upgrade this intersection.
So it's going to be a roundabout regardless
No, it was
of
going to
what?
be a light. If you look at the documentation, it still says light. But sometime last year, they decided, well, this is going to have to be a roundabout, given what this plant is going to do in terms of traffic.
So that's my point, that they're putting the roundabout in. They're assuming this plant is a done deal.
Probably. I mean, that's kind of, again, when you start lining these things up, if you're at the state, their assumption is it's going to go through. It's like with the DEP that you're going to, their bias is to, approve it or figure out a way to make it work. The state's not necessarily in the business of saying don't do things.
Is that part of the negotiation? The Sidewinder would put in the roundabout? Or
No.
Put in the light? So that's going to be done by the state.
State is paying for that with federal money, which raises another question. Will that federal money, still be there?
So $1.4 million in your article was the quoted amount to do the roundabout?
That's what they're saying. Plus the cost of the they have to acquire land. So they're going to condemn land around there because obviously a right-of-way is a little bit bigger than, it's a very narrow, tight intersection.
So Steve, as I heard from you and others, there are 3 issues involved with this. One is the quantity of the water. One is the quality of the water with this cone of depression, and the third one would be the truck traffic coming through. Is that correct?
That and the unknowns. Because you've met the gentleman from Sidewinder.
Yeah.
It's Sean and
Seems like a good guy.
Well, 2 of them. But that seems to be the company. I mean, that's all they've ever represented is they are Sidewinder, but they've also said that we're going to have an end user or users, but they don't know who that is. And I take them at the word. I don't think they have a specific end user. So
They've denied it's going to be a data center, though.
correct. There's all sorts of rumors, and that's part of the challenges. It's not going to be a small nuclear reactor. It's not going to be a data center. It's not going to be a transportation center. They are focused on a water bottling plant. But so that they're making a lot of commitments and assurances. But I think a lot of people in the county, say, well, if we don't know who the ultimate operator, owner of this is going to be, I mean, you're making promises, but that's like a real estate agent. Whoever comes in, once they buy it, they can do anything with it. So, and we don't know. So that's always in the background with a lot of this stuff. But yes, Bill, you're saying it's the water and it's the traffic.
Water and quality and quantity. Is one of the two getting more interest than the other one between the quality and the quantity?
Well, I think when you talk about the people that showed up at the first meeting and the people that showed up at the second meeting, I think the thing that was really affected the planning commissioners was, one, seeing all the people out there, but then listening to the stories that those people were saying, and they were all across the county, across the political spectrum. You had farmers, you had artists, you had students, you had your retired people, and the issue is not just specific to this site. So if water extraction can be done anywhere in the county, then it could be done anywhere in the county. And so the question is, does this set a precedent? And it's easier for these guys at Lake Louise because they have this facility, an industrial facility, and they had the water. They already owned it. But if this goes through, then what people are concerned about is like, okay, well, we have these other large parcels. Why can't we just put in, more wells, put in a truck facility, and pump the water out? Because you're not paying anything for the water. It's basically a free resource. And this came up at the county commission last week. There was a resolution they passed, Jefferson County first. It's about like the development, whether it's transmission lines or solar fields or whatever that's being done in Jefferson County should benefit Jefferson County, not just taking it out and shipping it somewhere else. I mean, we've seen that in West Virginia.
I'm going to come back to those power lines as soon as we finish with the water thing before you're done here. John Gilstrap?
Yeah, it's interesting. The whole roundabout thing, I think the premier roundabout that I can think of right now is at Rockcliffe Drive and Tavern Road. And I was following an 18-wheeler that went around the roundabout by essentially dragging the entire left-hand side of his truck across the roundabout. Right. Yeah, there is no roundabout for the vehicle that I was watching. When does water extraction sounds like very severe. as opposed to water removal or what?
Yeah.
What is the volume breakover?
It's not. It's a distinction between when you if you're a farmer, you're using water, you pump irrigation, you pump out a lot of water, but then you spread it across the field, or you spray it across the field, and it goes back down. So it's a cycle.
And why is quality, assuming that the water extraction is then going to be used for a bottling plant, and the bottling is going to be marketed commercially, I presume that the purpose of the plant is to purify the water. So why is the quality of the water coming out of the ground a concern of the community at this point?
Well, Bill was talking about the quality of the water that stays in the ground. I think what you're talking about.
Well, no, actually, I'm talking about the stuff that's under the 3M plant that has all sorts of a lot of chemicals in it.
Toxic
plume.
plume.
The toxicity,
right?
And when you pull out, you have what they call a cone of depression, and as long as the cone of depression is fairly stable, then you don't have a problem. If you pull too much water out, then the cone of depression starts collapsing, and then the toxicity moves into
It's kind of like you're in the shower and your roommate flushes the toilet and it takes the water pressure down, and all of a sudden you're either too hot or too cold.
It's my college dorm, man.
Right, and so that's what. So anytime you take a large amount of something out of the aquifer, you're changing the dynamics of the aquifer, especially in this karst.
Yeah,
that I think is.
And
what
we've
they're
never
talking
been able to get anybody in this studio to quantify or go on the record saying that this will not be a problem.
Right. Well, so when this just goes I'll put this in the context of a bigger picture and talk like the remediation, because you have them on there. You're never certifying that something is certain, in this type of environment. You're saying, well, this could be this could be that. You have to test it at each site. So there's always a lot of uncertainty, and I think that's. Unless you want to go to the expense of putting up a massive amount of monitoring wells and testing, you're never going to know. It's all theoretical, and you just know that this karst is prone to fractures, sinkholes, and that what happens way over here can have an effect way over here. Unlike in a sort of a uniform environment where you can kind of model it. You can't really model the karst in that uniform way.
Yeah, you're exactly right. With karst, everything can be viewed as a series of conduits,
and it changes.
Yeah. And but if you take all the water out of a certain reservoir in karst, it's awful difficult to get that to be recharged.
Yeah.
Whereas the diffused effect, like in sandstone and shale and the others, it's much easier for it to recharge at a uniform level.
Right. So think of like a uniform sandstone. You have a bucket. In karst, what you have is kind of like a series of colanders.
Yeah.
That you're like juggling around, and the water kind of like can spill back and forth between them.
And that's the reason, John, you have not heard anyone come in and say definitively there's not going to be a problem. If we were doing the same thing farther west, say in Morgan County, you would not hear that statement because that's mostly sandstone shale. But the karst puts a different level of complexity. That's why nobody can say with certainty there would not be a problem.
Well, it seems to me, this whole discussion, it's like we're marching into a whirling propeller blade. Let's just keep going. We're not sure.
Well, and when you think about it, that's kind of what when I looked at the planning commissioners at the first meeting in back last fall. It's like kind of that's what their faces look like, and that's one of the things that's been suggested here is that look, the role of the planning commission is to interpret, the zoning ordinance and follow the subdivision regulations. And that's why we do text amendments to the zoning ordinance. Like when the solar came in, there was not a process for permitting this, and they said, "Stop! You got to make a process for us first, because we're like just interpreting this, and if we have nothing to interpret, we're just kind of like back and forth here." So that's one of the proposals passed here. It's like let's put a text amendment out there for the use of water, the extraction of large volumes of water, in the county. Define where you can do it. If there's any conditions on it, does it, and how obligations to your neighbors because you're all connected, underneath. Yeah.
Let's talk power lines now, Steve. I heard Colin had the story on our newscast of the Jefferson County First agenda and some complaints about these transmission lines. We've heard a lot about these lines over the last couple of years. Where are we in regards to these actually going through? And is it true that Northern Virginia is actually the beneficiary of the power going through these lines?
Yeah. So there are 2 lines that have been approved by PJM. PJM Interconnect is the grid manager, and think of them as air traffic control. They're there to make sure that we get 120 volts reliable, at 60 kilohertz, and it doesn't go up and down too much. And then if a power company is plugging a new power plant in there, it's not like juicing everybody's toasters and popping everything out. And so they have approved 2 new transmission lines. And this is in response to the growth projection in Virginia. So over the past 5 years, Dominion Power has each year it's almost like they've doubled the anticipated demand they're going to have. So, and it's something on the order of like 10 or 13 gigawatts. So, which is double their entire generation capacity, right now. So, and it's all mostly coming from power centers. They released that data last fall. The state, it's what's called the State Corporation Commission, said we want to know where this demand is coming from, and so they went and sliced the numbers. Says, yeah, it's coming from the data centers. Most of them are in Loudoun County. There's some in Prince William County. So those 2 lines, one is a 500 kilovolt, the other is a 765 kilovolt. So there is one 500 kilovolt line crossing the county, and you can there's one in Berkeley County too, by Beddington. That you can see them coming into that. So that's what a 500 kilovolt line looks like. Those little lines that you see like going up and down your street on the little T-poles, those are like under like 26 kilovolt. I mean, they're tiny. So big gap here. The reason I say that is that you can't just plug into those big wires. So they have to be stepped down. There are no substations to take power off of a 500 kilovolt line in Jefferson County. There's no substation to take power off a 765 kilovolt line into Jefferson County. So none of the power that's going on either of those 2 lines is going to come into Jefferson County. It's going to fly over, it's going to go from the power plant over into Maryland or Virginia, where they're going to step it down and put it into the distribution system over there. So it's very clearly intended to.
So why should Jefferson County residents be inconvenienced by the lines?
That was it's not more inconvenience. I mean, it's taking. I mean, if you look at where those lines are going to go, there's some areas where it's a wide open farm field or farmland, but there's some areas where there's a lot of development, and it's going to be tough to fit.
Does the county have the final say-so on this? It's a state issue or a federal issue?
It is primarily a state. So PJM approved that you could plug into the grid, and that's their role. They're done with it. Then FERC has a role to say, well, how much you can, who gets to pay for it? The ratepayers of each state. They apportion it out. But then each state, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, it's a public service commission that determines.
Isn't West Virginia getting paid for the power though?
Not all of it. No, some of it's coming. One of them is connecting into a power plant in West Virginia. The other one is coming from Pennsylvania. So it's looping down.
On that note, we are out of time. Steve, thank you for yours. Have you back again. This issue deserves more attention.
Well, I can come back and tell you what happened.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Steve Pearson for the West Virginia Independent Observer. We are back with Financial Phil right after these.